Marvel Zombies has come out and has been a breath of fresh air in the MCU. It was dark, it was gory, it was fun, and it gave something that the fans of the MCU have been wanting for quite some time. And I'm sure Marvel is wondering, why is this show working so well? What did we do this time around that actually worked? Because some of our past shows and films aren't exactly getting the fans excited. And that's because Marvel Zombies did things that Marvel has never done before. It did things that Marvel used to do, but now they don't. And as fun as it was, it still made some mistakes along the way that Marvel frequently makes. So let's break down what Marvel can learn from Marvel Zombies. But before we get into all that, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I do deep dives on the film and TV industry and break down news and trends. So if you're into any of that, please subscribe. I recently hit 1,000 and now I'm a YouTube partner, which is insane to say. Thank you so much for checking me out, but let's get into it. Now, it's easy to say that Marvel went TVMA, and that's why Marvel Zombies flourished, and because of this, it allowed them to have gore and violence, the likes of which we haven't seen since Deadpool and Wolverine, and that's why people liked it. But that's not exactly what Marvel should learn from this. I feel like it's a little bit deeper than that, because this show could have very well been the same thing that Marvel has been doing for years with both their story and their characters, and if they did that, even with violence and gore, it still would have largely felt the same and would not have been great. But Marvel Zombies didn't do what the MCU has been doing. Instead, they gave us something that Marvel has been lacking for quite some time. They gave us real stakes. In the first episode of Marvel Zombies, it made it very clear that anyone can die. I absolutely loved how Kate Bishop, who seemed like she was going to be a main character, gets absolutely wasted by Captain Marvel in the first 5 minutes, and seemingly Riri Williams dies as well. This gave the show a weight that the MCU doesn't really have. Very rarely do characters die in the MCU anymore, and the stakes of a lot of their fight sequences have been lacking in terms of thinking that the heroes could actually lose. But Marvel Zombies didn't do that. Marvel Zombies made it very clear that anyone can be killed off at any time. This led to every single action sequence being littered with stakes, and also the fun of the blood and gore. And they didn't just do it just once for shock value, but they did it in every single action sequence. A notable hero or heroes died in every single fight, constantly reminding the audience that there are real stakes on the line. They also didn't shy away from characters that are currently leading the MCU. There were very few characters in the show that I felt like were off limits. I thought for sure that Yelena, Red Guardian, and John Walker would for sure be in this entire series, but they proved me wrong and killed them all off, even though those characters now have a much bigger following and a fan base. And the lesson isn't to kill off all your characters. I understand why the MCU can't just waste all of their characters. They are still a business that needs sequels and Avengers movies, and those movies won't work if everyone's dead. But they can do things that they've kind of forgotten how to do with both death and emotional stakes. This is something that Marvel used to have, but I feel like recently they've gotten incredibly scared to do. They do this sometimes with No Way Home killing off Aunt May, which wasn't just a death, but it mattered to Peter's emotional stakes. And of course, with Multiverse of Madness, they killed off Wanda. But in a lot of their recent movies, they tend to shy away from death and consequences. And even when death does happen, like with Thor: Love and Thunder, they pivot away so quickly that the death doesn't mean much emotionally. And even if there's not a death, there's no real emotional stakes to a lot of these fight sequences because the MCU lacks a lot of consequences. If the MCU wants to get back to where people truly care about it again, I think they need to reevaluate their stakes and get people emotionally invested again. So that way when they do watch these tense action sequences, they know that something, whether that is an actual death or a massive consequence, will actually happen and change the story, just like how Marvel Zombies did. And yes, that means that unfortunately, some characters will have to die. But that's okay, because other characters can take over, and that is something else that Marvel Zombies excels at incredibly well. Because of how the What If episode of Marvel Zombies occurred, many of the huge staples of the MCU were not able to be used because they were dead, and that forced Marvel to have to utilize characters that the MCU hasn't really utilized in the same way. In Marvel Zombies, the ones leading the show are Ms. Marvel, Shang Chi, and Blade Knight, and it made it clear that these are the main characters of the show, and this is a stark departure from what the MCU has done. The MCU post-Endgame had a lot of wrap-up to do, continuing and finishing character arcs like with Guardians of the Galaxy 3 and No Way Home, and they were unfortunately hit with the tragic passing of Chadwick Boseman, and then they had to pivot as it did seem like Black Panther was going to be a very centric character in the MCU. But they've also had quite a bit of directionless introductions with several characters that haven't really seemed to go anywhere, and it's very unclear just how important they are. Shang Chi came out in 2021 and we haven't seen his character since, having only seen him in episodes of What If. Hawkeye introduced Kate Bishop, who only had one cameo appearance since her debut in 2021. There's been zero mention of She-Hulk, Echo, Moon Knight, all of the Eternals, and there doesn't seem to be a plan for them. In the early days of the MCU, all their heroes had sequels relatively quick, letting the audience know that they will be centric, and it helped build out their characters to deepen their connection with the audience. But now the MCU lacks a vision, where Marvel Zombies utilizes these characters in a way that the MCU hasn't. I honestly had forgotten how much I enjoyed Shang-Chi until I saw this series, and even though their moments were quick, I loved seeing Kate Bishop again and wish that there were more moments with her throughout the entire MCU. Marvel Zombies proves that you don't need to rely on the heroes of the past in order to tell a story or have people care. These characters can very much lead their own show, and this is something that the MCU has forgotten entirely. Iron Man was nothing more than a B-list hero until the film came out, and the same thing can be said about the Guardians of the Galaxy. But you can catapult these characters into something that people truly care about as long as you put in the time to invest in them. This is something that TV can really do since you have so much more time to flesh out these characters, but being a TV show is something that Marvel Zombies seemed to forget that it was. Marvel Zombies, as good as it was, at times it forgot it was a TV show. The creators have stated that they envisioned this as a book where every single episode was a chapter, but part of it feels like it was kind of written on the fly. The introduction of Peter and Scott and what happened with the Wakanda event happened in episode 3, and it really wasn't needed until episode 4. It doesn't really make sense why they decided to do this and not have Peter or Scott be in episode 3 more than just the introduction. In TV and even film, it's okay to have multiple stories at the same time, and they should have made them bigger characters in episode 3 if they wanted to include that introduction. They could have very easily used them to expand upon the Wakanda event that introduced the plot where Hulk absorbed all the Infinity Stones, as that entire plot seemed very shoehorned into the last episode. They could have expanded their arc, where Peter and Scott are now in this world and they've been dealing with this zombie invasion for the past 5 years. How are they feeling? Is there any survivor's guilt from these characters? These are potentially really interesting emotions that we don't get to see too often in Marvel, and they could have used the power of TV to utilize this. Or they could have just saved the entire introduction for episode 4. Once they were introduced in episode 3, I knew that they were going to be the ones saving the gang in episode 4 since they were completely absent from episode 3, and that, ironically, lowered the stakes. Marvel is still figuring out how TV should function. They have been largely writing their limited series as a movie, and they did the exact same thing with Marvel Zombies. Now, to give them the benefit of the doubt, there were things that potentially stopped them from doing this, like how this was actually originally envisioned as a movie, but then they had to pivot because of the rights of Spider-Man and they weren't allowed to make a movie with Spider-Man, or there could very well be budgetary reasons that have not been released yet to the public. But I do think Marvel needs to learn how to treat TV shows like TV. They're kind of doing this with Daredevil Born Again, already having a season 2 and already greenlighting a season 3. But Marvel Zombies proves that they haven't really learned anything, because they should be working on a season 2 for this show already, and they're not. According to the creators, it is still not greenlit for season 2, and given how it's taken 4 years since the initial What If episode, it's not looking good that we'll see a second season anytime soon. I doubt that it will take another 4 years, but 2 years isn't great either, and they need to build off of this hype that they have now, have more confidence in themselves, and treat this like a real TV show. They know that this is an issue since they've stated that Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man and X-Men 97 should be on a yearly cadence starting next year. But considering how this was made so long ago that Elizabeth Olsen barely remembers recording her lines, it shows that they still have a long way to go when it comes to learning how the TV model functions. But overall, I think Marvel Zombies was a step in the right direction in terms of creating something fresh and new in their cinematic universe. They may not have completely knocked it out of the park with everything, but they are very much headed in the right direction as long as they learn what they did in Marvel Zombies, using different tones to make projects feel different, having real stakes and leaning on smaller characters to lead the MCU instead of being stuck in the past, and treating it like a real TV show. If they do all of this, the MCU may actually come back to where it once was, where people cared. Have you checked out Marvel Zombies yet? Do you think there is anything else that Marvel should learn from the show when it comes to building out a universe? Let me know in the comments below. And please be sure to like this video as well, as it does help push it out into the algorithm and find more people like yourself. And please subscribe if you haven't already. If you do, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.